The European Football Championships wrapped up in West Germany, with both favourites succumbing in the semi-finals. The hosts exchanged penalties with the Dutch, before Marco van Basten scored the winner in the 88th minute, while the young Italy side went down 2-0 to some Soviet flair. The final then was a rematch of the first group game, which the Soviets had won 1-0, but the Dutch were not to be beaten again. Some ping-pong in the box gave Ruud Gullit the opener, which was followed just after half-time with an absolute screamer from Van Basten to give the Dutch their first ever major trophy after being losing World Cup finalists in 1974 and 78. In Paris, two commuter trains collided head-on at the Gare de Lyon, killing 56 and injuring 60. An incoming train had made an emergency stop when a passenger pulled the emergency cord, and the brakes had not been properly reset. The train staff moved passengers back into the last carriage, but a signalling error diverted the runaway train into an occupied platform instead of an empty one. There had been numerous failures of both equipment and procedure across the board, an investigation later found. Iran Air Flight 655, an Airbus A300 flying between Tehran and Dubai, was shot down by surface-to-air missiles fired from the warship USS Vincennes in the Persian Gulf, with the loss of all 290 lives on board. Exactly what happened and why remains a matter of controversy to this day. The US Navy says the aircraft was somehow incorrectly identified as an Iranian F-14 Tomcat, which were believed to have anti-shipping missiles, and that the crew of the Vincennes attempted to contact the aircraft 10 times before firing. The Iranians claimed that the aircraft was transmitting normal civilian identifications and that Captain Rogers of the Vincennes was irresponsible and overly aggressive. President Reagan sent a diplomatic note expressing his regrets to the Iranian government, and when asked by a journalist if he considered that an apology, he said yes, but nonetheless no formal apology or admission of liability has ever been made. And just to cap off a fortnight of disasters between the US and French Grand Prix, the Piper Alpha oil rig in the North Sea exploded after a leak during maintenance, killing 165 of the 226 people on board, with 2 more dying when the standby vessel Sandhaven went to try and pick up survivors. The subsequent inquiry criticised the rig's operators, Occidental Petroleum, for inadequate safety and evacuation equipment and procedures, and made hundreds of recommendations, many of which became law in 1992. Between the loss of up to 10% of North Sea oil and gas production and the total insurance claims of around $1.4 billion, this is estimated to have been one of the costliest man-made disasters in history, and also revealed some serious problems within the insurance industry. Things had been happening within the F1 community too, with a palace coup at Maranello, where the elderly Enzo Ferrari was said to be deeply unwell. Chief designer Harvey Postlethwaite left after 5 years with the Scuderia and was snapped up by Ken Tyrrell to begin immediate work on their 1989 car.
Well, I kept hearing rumours that Harvey wasn't happy at Ferrari, and I thought that, we need to improve the quality of our engineering generally, and so Harvey is the start of that. We aim to do more in the next couple of months. The design of the new car is entirely in his hands, and Brian Miles is staying on as chief engineer, and he's very happy about that.
And there were also rumours that Michele Alboreto, who had been a favourite of Postlethwaite's, might follow him there after his lacklustre performances of late, with Nigel Mansell again tipped as a replacement. Nigel was cagey when asked.
It's a very difficult question. As far as I'm concerned, I'm a professional. I've got to see this year out first. We've got another 10 races, including this one this weekend, and we're not even halfway through the season yet. I don't want to even think about next year. There's a lot to do this year yet.
Over at Williams, meanwhile, work continued on the troublesome FW12 with revised radiators and cooling systems to try and combat the overheating problem on the Judd engines, while Lotus seemed to be all at sea, and rumours had it that if they didn't pull themselves together soon, they could lose their Honda engines, Camel sponsorship, and with them the services of Nelson Piquet, designer Gerard Ducarouge, and even manager Peter Waugh. They had new Bilstein shock absorbers here that they were hoping would smooth out the bumps in the absence of the active suspension system that they'd abandoned last year. Over at Woking, though, there were no such troubles, with the only real question being which of the 2 McLaren drivers would be on pole on Sunday. Ayrton Senna had a 100% record so far, and one more would give him the record for consecutive poles, which he currently held jointly with Niki Lauda and Stirling Moss. But Alain Prost hadn't won in France since his Renault days and would be keen to reclaim his momentum and put one over on Senna in front of his adoring fans. Prost made no secret that he intended to win this one. He'd allowed Senna to have the spare car set up for him so far this year, but in France it had Prost's name on it, and in qualifying he looked like a different driver from his usual clinical style, using every inch of the tarmac and then some with aggressive late braking. He was half a second quicker than Senna in every session, and it would be Prost who, for the first time since Monaco last year, sat on pole position. Senna was second, of course. Then came the Ferraris of Berger and Alboreto in their now customary second-row slots, followed by the two Benettons, then the two Loti, Nakajima again redeeming himself from a DNQ with a good performance at the next race. Mansell was ninth alongside Capelli, who still had his foot in a cast from Detroit, then Warwick alongside De Cesaris on row 6th. Patrese could only manage 15th in the other Williams, just behind Caffi's Dallara. Both Zach Speeds qualified for a change, only for Ghinzani to be disqualified for missing a weight check, which promoted Oscar Larauri to the grid, but joining Pierre Carlo, Julian Bailey and pre-qualifying casualty Tarquini on the pit wall come Sunday were both Ligier drivers, a new low for the struggling team and for Arnoux in a race he'd won 5 years earlier. Like Mexico, the Paul Ricard circuit was at altitude, around 2,000 feet 600 metres above sea level, which would affect the power output of the atmospheric engines, and race day temperatures were expected to be hot, which didn't bode well for the Judd engines with their perennial overheating problems. On the flip side, the circuit was also a thirsty one, with much of the lap done at full blast, and the high temperatures could also upset the delicate turbochargers. And just to throw a further wildcard into the mix, Goodyear had said that teams would probably need to make at least one tyre stop on the abrasive dusty surface. What the home fans wanted to see, of course, wasn't a shrewd tactical contest of fuel economy and tyre management, but an all-out ding-dong battle between Prost and Senna, with their man coming out definitively on top. And if in the absence of the Ligiers, the AGS and Larousse boys could do well too, well, that would be a bonus. So everyone lined up after the parade lap, the lights went green, and away they went, with Prost getting away best, and Berger also getting the drop on Senna. But the McLaren got the inside line into turn 1 and took the place back. So it was once again two McLarens chased by two Ferraris, with Piquet 5th, followed by the two Benettons of Boutsen and Nannini, with Mansell 6th, all of whom having got past Piquet's Japanese teammate. By the end of lap 1, Prost was already a second ahead, with Berger once more hanging on Senna's rear wing and hoping his fuel would hold out, while Alboreto, as usual, dropped away from them. Prost was charging, pulling rapidly away from Senna and doubling the gap to 3 seconds after 5 laps. Senna responded, speeding up to begin matching Prost's times and slowly closing the gap once more. Behind the leaders, meanwhile, Nakajima in 9th was leading Warwick and Cheever, running together as usual, with Capelli and his Plasticast behind them. Soon De Cesaris joined the train, and on lap 12 in the very background of shot, Nakajima missed a gear and Warwick spun heavily into the wall, avoiding him. Deep frustration for Warwick, no doubt, but given as he was still suffering breathing problems and muscle pains after his Canada crash, maybe it was just as well. By now the McLarens had stabilised the gap at around 3 seconds, and Berger had once again had to back off for fuel and was being left behind at a rate of about half a second a lap. Soon enough, Prost was among the back markers, which would give Senna, always more incisive in traffic, an opportunity, especially when Martini overtook Larauri right in front of Prost. When they both got through that little group, Senna had indeed caught right up behind the Frenchman. After 20 laps, around a quarter distance, Boutsen pitted with engine software issues. A new control box was fitted and off he went, but he would spend the next few laps in and out of the pits before finally retiring on lap 29. This promoted Mansell to 7th and right behind Nannini, but the Williams was still proving troublesome despite its upgrades. Its reactive suspension didn't respond well to low downforce circuits like this, and to cap it off, Patrese was having brake troubles. On lap 22, Berger made an early tyre stop, emerging between Mansell and Nannini, and soon passing the Benetton for 5th. Once the cameras returned to the McLarens, Nakajima also got past Mansell into 7th. By now, as the McLarens made their way through more traffic, the Honda technicians had told them to back off a bit, and their lap times reduced as Berger made a charge, easily passing Piquet for 4th and setting off after his teammate. Mansell and Nannini pitted for tyres together. Senna made a stop from 2nd, while the cameras watched Patrese make what turned out to be quite a long pit stop. Senna rejoined the circuit some 22 seconds behind Prost, as Alboreto made his own stop, so the Brazilian retained his second place. A couple of laps later, Prost peeled in for his stop, but a sticking wheel nut cost a couple of vital seconds, and Senna went through, just in the lead, as Basten's engine finally packed up and he retired. Senna and Prost lapped Mansell and Nakajima, who'd swapped places once again, with a 3.2 second gap between the McLarens, and Berger back up to third, and Alboreto regained fourth when Piquet made his own stop. Senna and Prost were making their way through more traffic, and although normally you'd expect Senna to pull away as he sliced through, he was wrestling with a spongy gearbox, which put him off his rhythm and allowed Prost to catch up, as he was the one to be more aggressive past the backmarkers. Jonathan Palmer was out on lap 44 of the 80, and when Prost lapped Pierluigi Martini a couple of laps later, he was right up with Senna. There was also a battle going on between the Ferraris as a lively Alboreto had turned up his boost and caught up to and past Berger, whose tyres were beginning to fade again, to retake third. Mansell's race was run as he retired from ninth place with a broken suspension, but the attention of the crowd was at the front, as Prost had closed to within half a second of Senna, setting a series of fastest laps in the process. But, as ever, catching is one thing and passing is quite another, especially when the person you're trying to pass is Ayrton Senna. For lap after lap, the two McLarens ran together as if on rails, Senna occasionally locking wheels as his gearbox continued to protest, but Prost was unable to take advantage. Still going at it hammer and tongs, they came up to lap 5th place Piquet, but before they could catch the Lotus, Nelson had in turn drawn up behind a knot of 3.5 litre cars and had nearly collided with the back of one, which nearly took Senna out too, but once that danger was over, Piquet got smartly out of the way. Senna was then presented with one of the Minardis to lap again, and, perhaps rattled by his near accident with Piquet and still struggling with a gearbox, he was slightly slow and Prost dove down the inside at Côte de Sagnes, passing both cars in a great move to retake the lead on lap 60. Of course, Senna wasn't going to stay happily behind him and continued to harry Prost as the home hero had more backmarkers to deal with, but once again, Prost was quickest through, roared on by the fans. With Senna's gearbox still reluctant to engage 5th or 6th, Prost began to pull away once more. With the laps now ticking down to the end, it looked like Prost had the race in his grasp as long as his car, fuel and tyres held out. Behind them, Alboreto had consolidated his third place from Berger, who had become unable to stay with the Italian on his fresher tyres. Prost lapped Berger a few laps later, but otherwise nothing changed in the top 6 for the last 15 laps of the race. Senna slowed right down in the last few laps, allowing several of the 3.5 litre cars to unlap themselves, but was never in any danger of losing second place. Alain Prost took a popular win in front of his home fans to recapture some of the momentum in the title race, which was very clearly going to be between himself and Senna, who came home second. Alboreto finished third and the only man on the lead lap, and could be satisfied with his day's work. Not only was not being lapped by the McLarens quite an achievement these days, but he'd beaten Berger fair and square on the track as well. Berger came in fourth, Piquet a lonely fifth, having driven the last 20 laps with no second gear, and Nannini the sole non-turbo point scorer in 6th place, with Nakajima 7th ahead of both marches. It had been a fairly low attrition race with just 10 cars dropping out and 16 running at the end, though Sala was 10 laps back after having to have all his spark plugs changed and was unclassified. So, 4 wins to Prost, 3 to Senna, with 3 second places to Prost and 2 to Senna, as Alboreto drew equal on points with Piquet, though still 8 behind Berger. And 5 1-2 finishes out of 7 for the McLaren team, who are again quite clearly going to win the Constructors' Championship unless something truly spectacular happens in the second half of the season. Shortly after the race, a deeply disgruntled Nigel Mansell, who had still yet to finish a race, never mind score a point, announced that he would be holding a press conference at Silverstone in 4 days' time on the Thursday of the British Grand Prix weekend. Many pundits thought this would be the moment that he chose to announce he was signing for Ferrari in 1989.